There are so many things I'd love to ask you in the time that we have. I thought what I'd do is go through what might be top of mind areas of recognition. When people hear the name C.S. Lewis, what comes to mind? And just go through them category by category and have you speak to those issues.
And as I had no children of my own, I felt the best way to entertain them was to tell them stories. And one such story I remember beginning like this. There were 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, who were evacuated from London, separated from their parents, and came to live with a strange old professor. And I think anybody who's read The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe will be familiar with that scenario. I didn't set out to write a series of stories which were encoded depictions of Christian truth, but I did one time ask myself, what if the Son of God came into a world of animals and came in the form of a lion? I think it's true to say that we were very, very fortunate to have Tollers read to us almost the entire manuscript of The Lord of the Rings as it was being written and long before it was ever published.
Tollers is what you called J.R.R. Tolkien.
Oh yes, of course. Tollers is J.R.R. Tolkien, and he's known as Tollers in the inner circle.
Interesting.
The other end I had in view turned out to be based on a misunderstanding. I thought I could describe a state, make a map of sorrow. Sorrow, however, turns out to be not a state, but a process. It needs not a map, but a history. And the history of my grief and my sorrow all began with letters, the letters from Joy when she wrote to me in 1950. And I realized I was looking at things from the wrong perspective. You know, when Joy and I got married, we really had only anticipated maybe a few weeks or months together. We had been given 3 years. And I realized it wasn't about what we hadn't been given, but what we had been given. As far as I was concerned, she was the gift and he was the giver. One day I got through the post a letter containing the book, Grief Observed, and somebody had heard about Joy and they thought they'd better send it to me to help me because they had heard that Joy had died.
So they sent your book to you?
They sent my book to me. But I'd already read it. The people who try and tell me that evil isn't present in this world are blind. You've only got to look around to see that there is evil that is present, and Scripture makes it very clear that the source of that evil is the devil and his minions.
Mere Christianity. Why mere?
Well, my intention was to sort of talk about the general elements of the Christian faith, to confine myself really to the core of Christian belief. I didn't want to get anywhere near the secondary issues which can be so divisive amongst denominations. And I didn't want to, and I also wasn't wanting to expound what I called my religion, I only wanted to expound what I called mere Christianity. By the time I got to my second boarding school, which was in Malvern, in the English countryside, I think my perception of God was that he was rather like a person who never answered your letters. So you either come to the conclusion that either he does not exist or you've got the address wrong. And in my case, I concluded that God did not exist. And so I slid very happily into what I call a youthful brand of atheism. And of course, like many a young atheist, I was living in a world of contradictions. For instance, I maintained that God did not exist, but was very angry with him for not existing. And it was during that conversation that I happened to say that I still thought that the story of Christ was nothing more than a myth. Well, of course, that set Tollers off. Jack, he said, in a way, he said, I see where you're coming from, and I understand it, because, as you know, I believe all mythology contains some element of eternal truth. But the story of Christ is fundamentally different. The author of this myth was God himself. The myth actually took place at a precise point in human history, and the whole of the myth is absolute truth. And I said, you mean even the dying bit and rising bit? Of course, he said. And I said, well, that's a bit hard to swallow, Tollers. He said, Jack, you amaze me. If you find the idea of a dying God in pagan stories, you don't mind it at all. You only object to it when you meet it in the Gospels. He was right, of course. I had come to accept that God was God, as it were, more by an act of logic than anything else. I knew that if I was going to accept that Christ was God, it would not be by an act of logic, but by an act of faith. You see, I had been brought up through in the school of rationalism, particularly with the great Knock, my tutor. But George MacDonald helped me to see that truth is more complicated than can be laid bare by just purely rational thought. And then I had this other growing feeling that it was as though I was on the outside of the world, the wrong side of the door. I discerned the freshness and purity of morning, but they did not make me fresh and pure. I couldn't mingle as I would like with the splendors I see, or I saw. But all the leaves of the New Testament were rustling with the rumor that it would not always be so. One day, God willing, I would enter in beyond nature. I would eat of the tree of life. And I did. And it's far better than anything I ever wrote.